Hi, I'm Nate Zollinger with Zbroz Racing, and I'm here today at Rocky Mountain ATV to show you how to install our high ground clearance, high strength trailing arm system for the RZR 1000 XP. All right, now we're going to move to installing some trailing arms on this Polaris RZR 1000. And in order to get started with that, you're going to have it up on the jack so the tires are off the ground. We've already loosened our lug nuts. You're going to remove the tire and wheel, and then first step is going to be removing the lower shock mount, your sway bar linkage rod, and swing all those out of the way so that you can get to everything else. Okay, when you remove this rear shock mount, make sure that you don't lose your shock reducer and O-ring. They tend to like to fall out and go on the ground and roll away. So when you go to put it back together, it's a nice chore trying to find them. Good idea is to stick them on the shock bolt, then you won't lose them. Set that out of the way. Okay, so we're going to remove the linkage, the sway bar link rod, and get it out of our way because we're not going to need that for now. We'll hook it back up at the end. So save your bolt here because you'll be using that to go back on the new trailing arm. Swing your shock out of the way. Sometimes these can be a little tight. Set that out to the side. And then using a strap, we're going to strap the shock up out of our way. And then this will just swing out of the way. So that way we can get to the brake line, which is our next step. You're going to use a torx and remove all of these little torque screws that secure the brake line to the trailing arm. Now I might mention this, I have seen on some trailing arms where they're not using these torque screws, they're actually using rivets. So the trailing arm kit has rivets in it included, but if you have these torque screws, you can simply reuse these screws. If not, you'll use the new rivets that are included in the kit. Okay, now the brake line's loose. So the next step is going to be to loosen these 15mm bolts that hold the trailing arm to the hub assembly. So I'm going to grab my 15mm ratchet and go around the back side and pull these 4 bolts out that hold it to the hub. So now that you got these 4 bolts loose and the nuts out of the way and set aside, you're going to lift up on the hub slightly and just kind of work the trailing arm out. And you lift it up all the way and the trailing arm should drop out of the way, and then you can set the hub down and it'll rest on the radius rods while we move to the front pivot point and remove that bolt, and then the trailing arm will come right off. Okay, when you remove the trailing arm, again, there's going to be some reducers in these spherical bearings. Remove those. There's going to be 2 O-rings as well, so be careful that you don't lose those. These are going to be reused in the new trailing arm. The spherical bearing itself can just stay in because the new trailing arm has its own spherical bearing. Set this to the side and we'll get going on the new one. All right, now that we got the new trailing arm here, I just want to mention a few things. The spherical bearing is already installed, so your reducers are going to drop right into there. Make sure you have your O-rings behind them. Also, just want to mention, because you're gaining more ground clearance, it's about 2 inches back here at the wheel area, so 2 inches of ground clearance is essentially like adding a 4-inch taller tire. So while it doesn't sound like very much, when you're out there on the trail, you're going to notice it a lot when you're going over obstacles, especially when you're going up steps and stuff like that, because that's what you're constantly dragging on, is the trailing arm. So to install it, you're just going to reverse the process. We're going to start with the front pivot point and just go from there. So using your 18mm ratchet and wrench, tighten back up this front pivot. It's always a good idea whenever you're doing these kind of installs is after you've got everything done, just go back over and double check everything. if you don't tighten it as you go, it's pretty easy to forget and leave something loose, so make sure you double check everything. Okay, so as you can see, we've got our holes here that we're going to line up for the brake line. The one that you will not use is this very front clip, so you can just remove that. You're not going to use that clip again, but the rest of them you will reuse. So there's 4 hole locations that you're going to reuse on this brake line clip. All right, now that you got the front pivot done, we're going to move here to the back and hook the trailing arm up to the hub. So remember, you're going to reverse that process, lift up on the hub to get this lined up with and get it back in around the boot. And then you just kind of have to work your way around to lining these 4 bolt hole locations up. And it can be a little bit of a trick, a little bit of up and down to get it lined up, but once you do, the bolts should slide in relatively easily. Sometimes if the powder coat buildup gets a little bit in the way, so what I like to do is come from this back side on one of the bolts, and I'll just push on it with a screwdriver or an end wrench or a pry bar and just kind of work the bolt in. And then once you get one in, you can stick one of your nuts on to hold it in place. Okay, so something also that you need to know is when you're putting these back on, you're not going to reuse your flat washer. It's already got a washered nut. And because this plate area is thicker than the factory one, we want to make sure that we have good nylock retention with the nut, so we're just going to use the nut by itself. And once you get 2 of the nuts on, you can use those as well to tighten everything against tight so that it helps line everything up. All right, now that we got the hub bolts tightened up, we're gonna go to the brake line. And you'll see there's 4 holes in the trailing arm, and there's rivets provided in the kit. And you're gonna use those rivets to retain the brake line in its factory location. Just wanna mention, make sure you give this line a little bit of a curve so that it's not sitting tight against the radius rod. And then you're just gonna install the rivets, starting at the back and working your way forward. And the brake line will still kind of move around inside these clips if you need to reposition it. I like to give it a little bit of slack right here so you can get your shock bolt in and it holds it below it. You don't want it to be above that shock bolt because the shock's going to be in there and there's a chance of pinching it, so try to remember to run that below the shock bolt. All right, now that we got the brake line hooked up, you can actually get your shock and unhook your strap that's holding it out of the way, and we'll install the shock first. One thing that you will have to do though, because of the nature of this high ground clearance portion of the trailing arm, where everything is moved up to give you more ground clearance, your shock guard can either simply be removed, or an easier thing to do is just rotate the shock guard to the back. You won't be able to mount it up if it's rotated forward because it's going to make contact with this. So just rotating it simply to the back is a simple solution, and then you can install the shock. Okay, so I have my shock bolt here now, and I put my reducers in there so I wouldn't lose them. So we're going to rotate this shock guard to the back position, like so. And then we're going to install our reducers and our shock bolt. Again, sometimes the powder coat buildup on this can make it a little bit difficult, but it should slip in that slot with a little bit of persuasion. There we go. Okay, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you can remember to run your brake line below this shock bolt, it'll reduce any chance of this getting up in there and getting pinched by something. So then tighten up your shock bolt with your 18mm, and then you're gonna hook up your sway bar linked rod, which we rotated out of the way. Sometimes it's a good idea to loosen the upper bolt just a little bit. That'll make it easier to slide this around and get everything lined up. So I'm gonna grab a hammer. Put your sway bar bolt in and tighten that up with a 15mm end wrench and ratchet. Okay, and then remember, again, it's always a good idea to go back over and check your hub bolts, your shock bolt, all the bolts and stuff that you loosened to make sure they're tight again so that you're ready to put your tire and wheel back on and hit the trail.